Hello, everyone. We're thankful for you to all be here. Welcome to ESHA's Genesis R&D webinar that today we'll present the most recent update of Genesis R&D version 11.8. Before we get into the main topic, let me give you a little background on ESHA Research. ESHA was established in 1981, and we've grown from offering one of the first nutrition and labeling softwares to a full suite of products, including Genesis R&D for Foods, Genesis R&D Supplements, the Food Processor Dietary Analysis Program, and our consulting services that can provide labeling services, formula review, and other special projects for our customers. Today, we're on Genesis R&D Foods, which was introduced in 1991 to address the formula analysis and compliance needs for the NLEA labeling regulations. Over the years, Genesis has experienced continued development and expanded labeling capabilities to Canada, Mexico, and EU formats, along with the United States restaurant and food service labeling. We continue to adapt the software to changing regulations and additional options that the government entities allow and clarify for us. So keeping current with the software keeps you current with all of our regulations. We have some upcoming webinars as well you may be interested in. On August 19th, what you need to know about cannabis labeling in Oregon. We've come out with a cannabis edibles labeling addition to our software. Feel free to contact sales if you have questions or need information on that. On September 16th, Health Canada Nutrition Labeling Regulations Review. On October 14th, we'll be tracking and disclosing sulfites using Genesis R&D Foods, and we'll soon be updating our website with more information and more webinars in the future. Please note, as always, we are recording the webinar today, and we'll send you a link of the recording and the slide deck. So you'll have access to the information we cover. We'll get that to you as soon as we can following the webinar. Also, please note if you have any questions during the webinar, send those in as soon as you think of them. Don't wait until the end. We have colleagues standing by that will help respond to them. So you can submit questions via the GoToWebinar control panel. Any questions that we don't get to before the close of the webinar, we'll reach out to you directly. Recapping what we'll cover today, new nutrients and nutrients to view sets in Genesis, Sulfites reporting options, a spec sheet report, a brief view of our Oregon cannabis label, and then we'll do some Q&A at the end. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to my esteemed colleague, ESHA, and she'll cover the new release of our Genesis software.
Thank you, Chris, as always. So we're really excited to share with you the newest developments for Genesis R&D Food. As we mentioned, this is version 11.8. It is in the process of rolling out, so stay tuned for notifications and look for that soon. I did want to mention a couple of things about the versions. When you're working in Genesis, you can click on the About button in your software, and when you do that, it will tell you what version you are running. So 11.8 will be occurring soon. You most likely will be seeing 11.7. A number of you will see 11.7 for now. And just a reminder that if you see 11.6 or earlier, please get in touch with the ESHA sales team. For one, we want to make sure that update notifications are reaching the correct personnel. So if we need to update any account information, or just check on your account status. So make sure that your account is current and you are receiving those updates as you should be. If you have any question for sales or about your account, go ahead and contact them at sales@esha.com. So let's just jump into what's been added with version 11.8. One of the things is new nutrients and components. We occasionally do need to add a few more nutrients and components pieces of information that'll help you in your work. So we have added lactitol and maltitol. These are specific sugar alcohols mentioned in the CFR, so it made sense to add those. And both of those sugar alcohols are measured in grams. We have the fields for sulfites in parts per million and in milligrams. So again, those are to help support the new features that were added to Genesis to help track sulfite content. And I'll be showing you those in the software. And then we have the CBD and THC in milligrams. Those fields were added to support, this organ labeling module, but as we expect to see more discussions and regulations come about concerning cannabis products, we wanted to make sure that those were in there to help support you and track information that you might need. You'll find all of these components grouped in the other nutrients category. So if you're working off of the entire list of nutrients in the software, look to the other nutrients category in the software and you'll see those new additions. We have added a couple new nutrients to view sets and updated one. So we want to, again, accommodate the newly added nutrients and components and adjust one to also accommodate the sulfites. So what you'll see in the software, a new nutrients to view set called Label US 2016 Mandatory and Sulfites. So that's your mandatory label nutrients for US labeling, plus we've added sulfites to those. The label US 2016 all has been updated to include sulfites. So again, while sulfites is not included on the label within the label, the nutrition facts label itself, it is pertinent to some of these considerations. So we wanted to include that, make it easier for you to find. And then we've also added the label US Cannabis OR, which is for Oregon, the Oregon state set of nutrients that are needed for labeling. So you can work with those anytime you're working with the nutrients to view. And just a reminder that the nutrients to view is where you would select the sets of nutrient that you want to see in working with ingredients, like entering ingredient information, working with your recipes, and then on many of the reports. You can select which nutrients appear on many of the reports. So you find those in nutrients to view. So Genesis version 11.8 includes features and reporting related to sulfites. While sulfites, like I said, is not declared within the nutrition facts label, there are conditions when the level of sulfites needs to be considered in declaring sulfites on packaging. The nutrient fields and the new features help identify when those conditions exist. And sulfites occur naturally in some foods, but they're added to a fair amount of processed foods to help maintain freshness, retain color, and other preservative effects. Sulfites are not included as part of the US allergens regulations, but there are known sensitivities to sulfites. So that gave them kind of a special consideration, and there is a declared or a known level, detectable level that we want to be aware of when working with ingredients that contain sulfites or are sulfiting agents. So in general, with food labeling, the ingredient list would identify those sulfiting agents, and there are several specifically outlined in the CFR in the exemption section. So that's 101.100 that discusses when you don't have to list incidental additives in the ingredient list of a finished food. With sulfiting agents, and again, they mention, the CFR mentions items like sulfide dioxide, sodium sulfite, sodium bisulfite, and a few others specifically, when those are occurring at 10 parts per million or more in the finished food, then those must be declared. That exemption of incidental additives doesn't apply when you've got sulfiting agents at 10 parts per million or more in the finished food. So again, we've added some features with Genesis 11.8 to help you track that information and work with sulfites better. You'll see sulfites appearing in a few areas in the software, one depending on which set of nutrients to view you have selected. And then again, depending on the reports that you're viewing or the screens that you're viewing, you might see sulfites in the ingredient nutrient screen. So if you have an ingredient record open and go to the nutrients tab, have a set of nutrients that is including sulfites in it, then you could expect to see sulfites listed, the value listed there. If that value, if the sulfites data is populated for that ingredient. Otherwise, you'll see a blank like you would expect to see with other missing data. You would also expect to see in the recipe screen, you can choose to view the sulfites in the recipe. When working with the recipe, as well as the recipe's nutrient tab. So kind of like ingredients, you can view the nutrients. You can also view that same or similar screen for a recipe. And then when working with the recipe itself, you can choose to display sulfites on the screen as you work with the recipe. So I'll show you that in the software as well. When you're working with the spreadsheet, like we encourage you to do with each of your recipes, and you include sulfites in your nutrients to view set, so you're seeing that sulfites in your spreadsheet report, you can see that the parts per million and milligrams fields are showing in this view. One thing is that the milligrams is used as kind of a conversion calculation. So parts per million for an individual ingredient won't change. It's a concentration, so that wouldn't change no matter how much of the ingredient you have occurring in a recipe. And here is a recipe reflection. So how much of this ingredient is contributing to the finished product in a recipe, in terms of the recipe. So again, this amount wouldn't change if you change the serving size of this recipe. But the milligrams is being calculated as milligrams per kilogram of ingredient. So it's being used to determine how much of the finished product contains, how much parts per million is contained in the finished product. So occurrences when you would see changes to this number, here I just have one ingredient that is contributing to sulfites. So while it is 10 parts per million as an individual ingredient and in kind of its base form, the amount of this ingredient that I'm pulling into my recipe is not occurring at more than 10 parts per million. If I had more of this ingredient, or if I had additional ingredients that contributed to the sulfites parts per million content, then I would look to this number as, is it 10 parts per million or more? And that's the number that's going to trigger some of the information that we're talking about today. And that leads us to the sulfite statement. So again, using that recipe, the underlying parts per million value per the recipe amount, if it is occurring at 10 parts per million or more, then Genesis will show a sulfite statement. And you have some options as to what this will say. It's an optional statement. It's one way of informing customers that the item contains sulfites. The other is, it's listed, specific sulfite ingredients are listed in the ingredient list, but the sulfite statement will occur in a few different places in the software. One is the view label. So when you open your recipe and you view your label, if the statement is triggered, you'll see it at the end of the ingredient list here on this screen. Another place in the software would be the ingredient list or the ingredient statement features. You'll see it at the bottom of the screen here. And then we have additional reports that do list ingredient statements. So some of the other reports, especially the Reports Plus, there are a few of those formats where the ingredient statement is showing, and then if triggered, the sulfite statement would also show on those. So that's sulfites. To switch gears, let me just make sure I didn't miss one here. Spec Sheets report, I did, and this is one I'm really excited about, so I don't want to skip that. You know, we're always trying to improve the software and listen to our feedback from customers, requests that come up in, and discussions that come up in our Genesis training sessions. So this one I'm really excited to share with you is the Spec Sheet reports. So this is a new report available, just as you would select from any of the other reports in Genesis. And the Spec Sheet reports can be generated from individual ingredient records or from your recipes. They provide a clean and clear format. This is a really nice looking format here, and it gives you the product information that can easily be shared with others. This slide here is showing an example of the recipe spec sheet report. So it's by default showing information per 100 grams, but you can change that amount. And when you do, if you change the amount that's pulling in, it will adjust the nutrient values displayed on this report. And here you can see there are certain fields that pull forward from the recipe record. So things like the user code and product and supplier, those are pulling from the recipe record itself, or when working with the ingredient spec sheet, from the ingredient record itself. Of course, the nutrient data is based on the analysis of the recipe, and again, by default per 100 grams, but if you change that to say the serving size, then those nutrient amounts will adjust accordingly. And then we have the ingredient statement, allergen statements brought in, and there's a comments field, so you can just add text, free text on any information here. I've added an example of packaging information. And then there's a place to bring in a signature, and then you can include the signature date. So this serves as a spec sheet that you can share with others. Very beautiful, very handy to have. I look forward to seeing some of these out in the industry. And then the cannabis label. So again, this is an Oregon cannabis label for edible products. We want to continue watching federal regulation, so we're paying attention to the FDA discussions and possible developments of regulation there. But as we wait for those developments, we wanted to monitor individual states. You know, the cannabis markets are moving ahead quickly, and regulations are all over the place from state to state. So Oregon, we're a bit familiar with that. It does tend to follow the nutrition facts label to a degree, so it was a reasonable place to start, and we're offering this as an additional module. I'll show you a few points of this in the software, but really if you have any questions about the cannabis label, get a hold of our sales team, sales@esha.com, or give a call, and then we will be offering a webinar that is focused on this specific topic. So with that, I will jump into Genesis and show you how to find some of these features. And again, as a reminder, if you're not sure about what version you're running, just check your About button and contact sales at ESHA if you have any questions about your account or the version that you have installed. So for the nutrients, I'm going to jump into nutrients to view and then just show you quickly those new nutrients that have been added. So when you're working with the nutrients to view and nutrients on the ingredient recipe screens, we have them automatically broken into these categories. So you have basic components, vitamins and minerals, and then the other nutrient section is here. We have sugar alcohols listed here, and then the individuals lactitol and maltitol were added in the 11.8 update. And then you also see the sulfites in parts per million and milligrams. And then we have CBD and THC. So those are all found in the other nutrients section of the nutrients list. Then we added nutrients to view. So a few of the sets, you know, we have the label US 2016 mandatory, but just to accommodate the sulfites and be able to easily work with the mandatory nutrients and sulfites if you're needing to track those, we've added that new label set, US 2016 mandatory and sulfites. The label US 2016 all is the one that was adjusted, so it now includes sulfites. Again, sulfites are not listed within the nutrition facts panel, but because it's pertinent to this labeling, it's not a new labeling regulation, but we're just accommodating it a bit better in Genesis now. That's included in the all set. And then you'll see the label US Cannabis for Oregon set of nutrients. And then let me jump into showing you a bit more of the sulfites in a recipe. So I'll just open a recipe. I have this one. So here we've got a recipe. And in working with that, I mentioned you can show sulfite information in the recipe here. I'm going to select from my nutrients to view that mandatory 2016 and sulfite set, just so I know I'm working with that. But here in the recipe view, we have these columns that automatically display. Mine may not be all set to default because I mess with my software a lot, but we'll see that obviously the ingredient name, quantity measure in your recipe, likely to see ESHA codes for those items if you're working with any from the ESHA database, and then some others. To adjust the columns that you see on the screen, if you just right click in this window, the second to last option here is display columns. So we've got some primary columns. Not all of these are selected by default, but many are. And then you can select nutrient columns to display on the screen as you're working with recipes. Sometimes it might be you want to see calories as you're working through a certain vitamin. Here, if you click on edit, then you can choose from the nutrients that are available in the software. And so here, if I want to see sulfites, I can double click on this to send it over to my selected, or I could use the arrows. Select the nutrients that I want to see, click OK. And then as I work with my recipe, I could see which ingredients are providing sulfites in parts per million, and then their affiliated milligrams value. So just a way to keep track of that as I'm working with the recipe and keeping in mind that this item does or doesn't contain sulfites. So then the another place I mentioned you could see sulfites occurring. If I go to the recipe tab and then edit recipe, here's the nutrients tab for my for my recipe here. I'm going to alphabetize and then get rid of those. So I have my in the proper order that I'm used to seeing. I just clicked on alphabetize and again to refresh that. But here I've got my mandatory nutrients for use labeling. And then I've also got my sulfites appearing at the bottom. So this is giving me a per recipe view where the recipe screen was reporting the ingredient information as I pull it in. And then we'll go to the spreadsheet report. Again, we always encourage you to view your spreadsheets when working with recipes. It's just a good double check. You're looking for dashes of information that need to be filled in. And then here with the sulfites, as I showed you in the slides, you're getting some feedback about the ingredients themselves. So again, here, parts per million for this individual ingredient. This is a different number than showed on the slide because I adjusted it for my ingredient, just know that. But here's the information that's reported for this total recipe because of this single ingredient. If I had more ingredients contributing to sulfites, this number would be higher. And again, that milligrams is just a way to convert the information. If you had 3 ingredients containing 10 parts per million, it's not that your end recipe would have 30 parts per million. It doesn't work that way, just adding up parts per million. So we need to convert that to get this tracking correct. And then I can show you the label. So if we view label for this recipe and for my serving, again, per the recipe were over the threshold of the 10 parts per million. And so you can see that the sulfites statement is included here in my view label. So if I want to change that, I have some options to work with the sulfites statement that's automatically populated. In the edit label settings of when you're working with the recipe, and we have sulfites as one of the nutrients available here. So if I expand my options, I can see that there's a statement. The statement can be displayed as, by default, it's this product contains sulfiting agents. I could choose to select a specific statement. If my product contains one of these specifically, then the statement can be adjusted to a specific sulfiting agent. And if I didn't want to include that statement, I can also hide this statement by choosing the Hide Sulfite Statement button. And another option is to enter a custom. So that we might see contains sulfites. That's just a generic. If there are multiple sulfiting agents, I might change that statement to say how different text. And I think I forgot to do something. Use the custom statement in this display as option, and then it will switch it over to contains sulfites or whatever text you choose to enter there. And then one other area, again, is the ingredient statement features. So working with the ingredient statement features here, the sulfite statement will be pulled in automatically at the end following that ingredient list. So you'll have a separate statement there. And it works off of those edit label options. So whichever, if you choose one of the options of text from the drop-down list, or if you enter your custom or you hide it, that will also be reflected in the ingredient statement set of features in the software. So then the spec sheet report, when we've talked about reports in a different webinar in a little more detail, but right here in the middle of the reports available, you'll see newly the 100-gram spec sheet report. When you open this in the software, it's going to appear as a form. So there are certain fields that you can fill in, like the date here is a text field. So you can enter that in as anything that you would choose to help date that report that you want to share. The user code and product and supplier information, that's being pulled in from I'll show you the edit recipe field and then our recipe information. So we've talked earlier in previous webinars about when you're naming your products, you can enter a few more fields. So this common name can be used if it's a bit more friendly than your recipe name, and then you can add user code information, select product and supplier information. So that will pull forward to the spec sheet report. And then it pulls in ingredient and allergen statements. Comments can be added. This is, again, a text field that opens up. You can populate that with any information that you want that is helpful to share. And then the signature line, and there's a date that can be pulled in to make this the report that you need, give it that date stamp. So very helpful information. And then I'll just do a print preview that shows it's a nice clean report. You can swap out the logo here, so I'll show you how to do that. But this is a report just so nice and able to save this as a PDF and share with others. We have folks that submit data for inclusion in the ESHA database, and so a report like this is very helpful to see. And then one other thing I wanted to show you here, so if I adjust the amount in this report, the nutrients automatically adjust for me. That's very helpful. And so I mentioned I can show you this. The logo, unless you work for ESHA Research, it's really appropriate to include your own information on this report. when you share with others. We've seen spec sheets out there in the world that have the ESHA logo. And so to change that to your organization, if you go to My Preferences and to Reports, this is in the Reports section rather than Reports Plus, go to Reports and you'll find a header section. There is a header image that you can bring in. So by default, Genesis includes that ESHA Research logo. And if I just bring in a different logo, I'm going to adjust the height because I know that this one shows up a little small. So I'm just going to adjust the height of my image there and bring that in. So now I can have a custom logo included on this report as well as the reports in the software. And then you can send that on out into the world. And let me just show you what this looks like for an ingredient record. So you can have an individual ingredient and create this report for just that. So I'm going to open this ingredient record, and here you'll see a reports tab for the individual ingredient. Looks similar to the recipe spec sheets report, acts a bit similar. There are some fields that you can populate yourself, like the date field. Again, this information, user code, product and supplier is being pulled in from the ingredient record. So our ingredient information, we populated common name, user code, selected products and suppliers, and that will pull through to this report. And then again, you've got ingredient, statement name, information, comments field that you can just type in whatever information you need to share, add your signature information. And then you'll have a nice looking ingredient report that you can share. So that's the spec sheet. And then lastly, I'll show you that cannabis report. Let me just close down a couple of these. So again, the cannabis is an additional module. If you have any questions, we're just going to tell you to contact sales. But I have a recipe in here. If I view my label for this product, I have some new appearances in Genesis. So this is the Oregon State formatted cannabis label based on OLCC regulations. You can see that it has a bit of scaled down nutrient information, includes the ingredient list within the facts panel image itself. And then there are some other requirements that go along with this. For this, I'll just show you briefly the edit label settings, just like the other label settings when we're choosing between different countries. This is one of the or where you would find the cannabis nutrition facts that we're seeing here today. If it's grayed out, then the module isn't available for you, so you'll want to contact sales. And it has some options that can be adjusted based on the Oregon regulations. So different categorizations of the types of products and the statements, the required statements that go along with that. So again, we'll show you more about that in a specific webinar, but just letting you know that that's available with version 11.8. And to contact sales if you have any questions about that. So with the webinars here, we tend to focus on specific topics or when updates are released. If you need more in-depth instruction, because there is so much to know and learn about the uses of Genesis, as well as the label settings and discussions on regulations, we have a variety of training opportunities throughout the year. Some of those coming up we have one July 14th and 16th is the next. There's still spots available on this. So if you're interested in learning more about Genesis, contact the training team or you can see registration information on the ESHA website. The July 14th and 16th and the August 25th and 27th training seminars that are trainings that are listed here kind of follow our general format. It can be a full 3-day option that covers the first 2 days are basics on the software and some regulatory information, and then a 3rd day that dives into advanced uses and topics. Or you can choose to attend the first 2 days as that professional level, kind of the basics of Genesis. Or if you already have a good feel for Genesis but do need to dive in a little deeper, attend that 3rd day just as a single day training. So if you have any questions, get a hold of the training team. And then occasionally we have specialty or special focus trainings like that in July for Canadian labeling. So this is a 2-day class and focuses on that professional level, the kind of the basic uses of Genesis and getting into labels, but all the labeling focus and discussion is on the Canadian labeling formats. So again, we have our full training schedule on the ESHA website. And if you have any questions, contact training@esha.com. and they will help you out. With that, I'll turn it back to Chris, and then we'll get into some questions.
As always, a fantastic job, Alicia. Great job. So as we mentioned, we are answering questions, and we'll address a few of the common questions we got. But since we're sending the slide deck out, we'll providing a slide here for our contact information of our various departments. We certainly encourage you to reach out to sales for questions on the new features that were added today, and if anyone's interested in adding them or getting more information about them. Our support department is terrific for any technical support, but also any types of software questions. And as mentioned in the training, been selling the product for 10 years and still always learning from our training team. They know so much about the software and regulations and industry. Our marketing department posts a ton of industry helpful content on our website, so we highly encourage you to take advantage of those. Our e-learning center has lots of information, and I see dietitians and formulators and people in Q&A downloading our cheat sheets all the time, which are really helpful desktop references. So I really encourage you to check those out, and we're helping hopefully our clients keep up with the changing regulations. So this slide is available. Check out those resources at your convenience. With that, we will turn to the questions and some of the common questions we got. Question number 1, will you have additional cannabis label formats available?
Great question, and that is to be determined. You know, like I said, we're following federal regulation and discussion, so of course we're going to keep an eye on that. At this time, we continue to monitor the state regulations and the conversations that come up around that. So we'll take that all in to help shape developments with Genesis. So at this time, the Oregon state label is the only available, but if you have any questions or requests, please contact the sales team at sales@ESHA. We want to hear your feedback.
Definitely, and we usually keep count on how many requests are coming in for what jurisdictions. So if you would have a state that you would like to see added, by all means contact us so we can get your jurisdiction moved to the top of the list by the counts. Question number 2, can I list specific sugar alcohol on my nutrition facts label?
Yes, you can, and I will show you that. Let me jump back into Genesis. And this has, you know, been the case for quite some time, but since we've added additional sugar alcohols to the software, you have a few more options to work with. Let me just find a recipe where that would work well. So when I view my label, I just have mine set to the standard mandatory label. And if I want to show sugar alcohols, that is a voluntary nutrient. There are some cases where you want to be sure that's declared if any claims are being made. But I can choose sugar alcohol, and when I do so, that's going to drop as a voluntary nutrient. Sugar alcohol appears on the label. If you have a single sugar alcohol occurring in your formula, in your product or recipe, then you can choose to list an individual sugar alcohol on the label. So in Genesis, we have under the nutrient options, so edit label nutrient options, find your sugar alcohol. You can expand the options here and then type in the text that is allowed there. There are some automatic options for abbreviation, but if you want the specific sugar alcohol listed here, let's see if I spelled this right. I could choose to include erythritol specifically within my nutrition facts label. So there you go.
Erythritol, huh? Now you're just showing off. Question number 3. Can you tell us about updated Mexico labeling requirements?
I can tell you a little bit. So as many of you are aware, and we've been getting some questions and feedback from many of you, Mexico is in the process of updating their required statements. So their warning seals that are to be placed on the front of package, as well as information that's being included in their nutrition label itself. So they have several phases that are going to occur and certain timelines. It's in kind of within the next 5 years, they'll be rolling out certain requirements. We are aware of this. We are looking into it. The ESHA teams are reviewing the regulations and planning for updates in Genesis, but we don't have specifics on a time frame yet. Just stay tuned and we will keep you informed about when that will be available.
Thank you. Question 4, what is the best way to share the spec sheet report? Do I need to be concerned about my proprietary formula?
Good question. Yeah, so I think the most common way that I would use or send the spec sheet report, and the way that I encounter spec sheet reports most commonly, with your reports, choose the spec sheet report, fill in the information that you need, and then you can print to PDF. So in doing so, this will save as an electronic copy, just PDF form of this static report. So once you save it as a PDF, no changes can be made. It's just basically that image type format that you can send on to customers or whoever need to share it. So you're not sending any proprietary information as long as you haven't included any, like in the comments or anything like that. So this is the analytical information that you'd expect to see on some of the other reports as well. In contrast, like I said, we talked about reports in different formats. The recipe card, this is a different report that would share proprietary information possibly. So you wouldn't necessarily want to send your recipe out into the world for others, for customers or clients to see. And this is a report that includes the recipe and the label. So that's the recipe card report. But the spec sheet is really designed to just be send it to customers, send it to those in different organizations, and no proprietary information shared.
Yeah, it's really one of the whole points of us adding that is for people concerned about sending that to others and not having their formula discussed or displayed. Question 5, how do I add a new nutrient?
Sure, this comes up. We've added some new nutrients, but you can do that yourself if your nutrients or components that you need to track in Genesis that are not already present in the software. So to add a new nutrient, just from the main screen in Genesis here, you can choose the database tab. If you choose modify, the initial screen that displays that first tab here is nutrients. So this is where you could add new nutrients. I've added a few nutrients in other fields to my software. But if I want to add one, just click on new and type in a nutrient or component name, add an abbreviation, whatever you choose that makes sense to you, and then a unit for the measure. And here you can, like I said, in Genesis, we have some categories for the nutrients. Kind of generally, some get dropped into the other nutrients if they don't fall into one of the others, or you might use user defined if you're just wanting to keep track of all those in the same spot that you've added. I'll just put this in other and OK. And then you can see once I've added that new nutrient, it's available in this list. So one thing here is that I've added the nutrient, that doesn't automatically give me data. So just because I add a new nutrient or component, it doesn't mean that anything will be populated. I would need to do that myself. So let me just jump into an ingredient here. If I'm entering new ingredients and I wanted to track that new nutrient that I've added, I'm just going to show all nutrients and alphabetize these for fun. But then I can see that I just added acrylamide. Now it would show in my software, but I would need to populate any new nutrients or components that I've added. I need to fill in the data in order for those to pull forward to recipes.
Great, thank you. Do the database items report sulfites?
At this time, it's such a new nutrient and we needed to add it to our internal system too. So no ESHA database items will be populated with sulfites in this update. We will of course be working on that too, trying to identify those ingredients that it would especially be, you reasonably expect sulfites. So we'll start looking into that. And then as additional updates come out, we will be tracking that information. At this time, if you need to track sulfites, then you would enter that as you're adding your new ingredients to the software. You can also use the override column in Genesis on the recipe level if you have a known sulfite level for a recipe and you want to enter that in.
Great. Well, I think that brings us to the questions for the day. Again, we want to thank everybody that attended here today. We really appreciate you tuning in. We're excited about this update. Please feel free to reach out and contact us, and we'll be sending out a copy of the webinar and the slide deck shortly. So thank you all very much. Be well.